Welcome, welcome, welcome this evening to Transparent. You will see that one of my co-hosts has her little camera on. She's busy getting ready for some travel. So she's going to be here, but she's going to have her screen off, just so everybody knows. I'm your host, Amber. My pronouns are she, her. You can find me on TikTok at Moonchild77. I'm not sure. Jenny, did you get that hooked up before or not? Like, are we on there tonight or no? Is she even going to unmute? There we go. And I didn't hear her. Okay. We'll see if something's going on with her. But tonight we have Dr. Stinnett back with us. Michael, thank you. Thank you so much from Oceanview. I did tag his information in the comments just so everybody knows. And tonight we brought you back because you had so much. Oh, she's got something going on.
It's so fun. Thanks. Hi, sorry.
Oh, let me take this one off. All right, and I can remove. Are you going to remove that one or?
No, but I am going to go dark. Hi, I'm Jenny, she, her. You can find me on TikTok and Lemonade at TransLovingMama. And I'm going to be talking and listening tonight, but I'm frantically cleaning my home, so I do need to turn my camera off. See y'all soon.
Not a problem. Not a problem. But yeah, so but we brought you back because you're so much in your realm that you do in advocacy, in your social justice work, that we really, because we were just talking about mental health aspects of it last time when you were here and what you do with Oceanview, we want to bring you back and really kind of talk about those and break down some of the different organizations that you work with, the committees that you're on, and the work that you do with them. Because I do think this goes broader into the conversation of what we should be looking at with trans rights and in the movement, really where we need more momentum, I think, right now, especially right now. So with that, I'll let you kind of intro some of that.
Sure, definitely. So greetings, everyone. I'm Dr. Michael Stinnett. I go by Michael, he, him pronouns. So in addition to my clinical work, I have 3 different areas that I focus on, and they fall into different regions. So the first is a consultation team that I run in southeastern North Carolina for gender affirming care providers, whether they be medical providers, mental health, affiliated care providers. It's a monthly team meeting for affirming care providers to come together, review cases, share resources, share connections to make sure everyone's receiving the gold standard of care. On a larger level, I also work on a statewide level with the North Carolina Psychological Association Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee. With that, I'm tasked with making sure that psychologists throughout the state of North Carolina have access to information that they need in order to provide evidence-based, equitable care to really all marginalized, underserved populations. I focus a lot on the LGBTQIA community. And then nationally and internationally, I'm with the WPATH, so World Professional Association for Transgender Health, Global Education Initiative, the Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Engagement Subcommittee, where we make sure that there are diverse voices around the table when we are developing training programs on gender affirming care. Because for the longest time, most of the treatment modalities and research were based on, European individuals, people of European descent. We did not have much representation from south of the equator. So we've tried to bring in more voices, more diverse points of view so that we can make sure that we are training with the realities on the ground where people are at. So those are my 3 different areas that I largely work in outside my clinical work.
Which that's what I like. I mean, because that's part of, honestly, this work, especially with advocacy, is educating and making sure that everybody is getting the top level of resources. I myself in nursing schools and the 2 programs I went through just noticed there was no training. No training. And even within the psychology, like I was looking at getting a minor in psychology at the time. And I think I took 9 courses overall, and never once did we break down anything about the impacts that go into the LGBT population and what they're going through. And then having a kid come out later, it kind of dawned on me like, wow, never in any department, in any subhead, you know, whether it was peds, whether we were talking about maternity, whether we were talking about psychology, in none of these departments, mental health, none of these were we talking about what do they go through? What are their impacts?
Right.
And that was a major gap that I did notice that was part of the reason why I really started kind of looking more at policy and legislation was because I noticed that there were gaps in those situations. I guess as far as on the North Carolina scale, what do you see that we're missing, or not necessarily missing, but what do you think we need more focus on?
Sure. Well, I think, from the feedback I get from professionals in the field, we do need more education. Not only do we need more education, just basics of, gender, whether that is
Right,
gender identity development, what ages and stages do we experience with our developing gender identity, from birth through death. We need that. We need education on what are the evidence-based treatment recommendations, whether those be from
right,
WPATH or Endocrine Society or whoever else's guidelines we're looking at. What are those and what should we be doing? Um,
right,
Also, I think, unfortunately, insurance companies frequently require psychological evaluations before accessing care. Many people don't feel that they are able to do those, even though
right,
every psychologist in the field has the knowledge, skills, and abilities to conduct those. They've just never been taught how to.
right.
Um, so education, education, education is where we have to start, in my opinion.
Right. And I think, and that's kind of when I noticed, not just at the parent level and our general population, like having conversations to educate one another on what is misinformation and what is truth.
Hmm.
It was the same way with the educators. It was the same way within the education programs. It was the same way on the hospital floors between, you could literally go from one nurse to the next nurse, and what one thought was how you upheld autonomy would completely deny the next person autonomy.
Right.
Um, for instance, okay, so I have this person that I follow on TikTok, and they were talking about a recent, I believe they said they were in Illinois. I think they were in Illinois where this happened, but they had gone into a hospital and they're in the emergency room and they're a trans patient. And the person next door, the doctor, the male doctor next door is talking to the patient. He can hear through the curtain. He's trying not to hear through the curtain, but he can hear through the curtain. And when he comes in, the doctor remarks to him, boy, that person is so weird, and starts literally telling him information about the previous patient, and then starts asking about scars on his chest. And he's like, and I'm sitting here thinking, do you think I'm going to give you that information when you just came in here and spilled another patient's information? And you wonder why trans people have such a fear of going in for care and worrying about whether or not their autonomy is going to be upheld. And then half want to question that and say, oh, well, no, that's a mental health disorder. And part of that to me is because, again, when those nurses, when those healthcare professionals were going through the programs, they weren't given enough education. And it really does start there, because if not, they're taking their bias to the floor, and that's what patients are experiencing because they've had no education to give it to them. So now I feel like we're having to kind of play catch up. And I don't know if this is beginning to be, I honestly have not looked at medical books, nursing books in the last couple of years to know if that's been updated, but I can tell you that 10 years ago, we still weren't there.
Sure. Yeah. And
When
if
I
you
got
look
my
at,
degree in 2019, we still weren't there.
yeah. And 10 years back, when I was giving trainings on gender identity development, um, the majority of my presentations would be, trans and gender diverse people exist. And
Right,
here's what I mean when I say use the word pronouns. And here's what
right,
I mean by sex assigned at birth. There was so much just the basic ground level. We have moved past that, at least from what I'm noticing.
right,
We no longer have to have the conversations about just mere existence.
right,
However, um, to your point, it wasn't that long ago that gender dysphoria was called gender identity disorder, which really communicated a lot of bias, in my opinion,
Right, right,
that there is a problem with your identity. The problem is not the mismatch between your identity and your primary, secondary sexual characteristics or
no,
society or your culture. The problem is your identity at its core. That's why we changed the name, several years back to gender dysphoria, because it better encapsulates, we're
right,
talking about that felt sense. That's the problem. It's not who you are. It's just that. But I
right.
think the language we've used, the history of stigmatizing and pathologizing gender variance, sexual
Right.
variances, um, we're dealing with that still to this day.
And I think that's because, again, we just don't have enough education around it. Um, Hearing that person's experience and thinking about what my son might go through because he goes in for consults in March and worrying about what, and I know that that's for through a gender affirming clinic, but at the same time, you don't know what nurse is going to give you that pushback, and maybe not even pushback, but just that lack of education. Jenny, her son had gone in for something with I believe a sprained ankle, and they kind of like some of the language that they use, they just didn't quite know how to talk about her son and what he was going through that process. She didn't even have the language, and part of that was because, again, it's not being educated. And if you don't have the language for it and there's no education for it, I think it's easier for people within the healthcare industry to lean into that. Well, that's your opinion,
Mm-hmm.
because they haven't been taught that. And I think if we really, really wanted to change healthcare around the LGBTQ population, it really comes from educating in those programs and starting from the very beginning before these patients ever, or not patients, but these nurses, radiologists, doctors ever make it to the floor with their first patient, is that they understand this. Because if they don't, then all they're going in is, again, with their opinion and their bias. So it's kind of, you're at the luck of the draw of what you're going to get. Um, and yeah, so far my son's been really lucky. I know it's not that way for everybody. And we're near a blue area where he's going to get his care is in a blue area, so like that, I'm not concerned about. I can tell you right now, he will never step into a facility in Johnson County.
Mm-hmm.
We will drive to Wake County. Like we're no, no, it's just not. I don't trust their care. I don't trust their bias in their care.
If I
Well, I
may,
think,
oh, I apologize.
go ahead, Jen.
Oh, thanks. I saw someone talking the other day about a film that's coming up that's being made, and there is a cisgender man who definitely like looks a little bit more feminine, and so they're casting that person as a trans woman, and rightly so. People within that community are upset about it because there are definitely transgender actors, and not just actors, but the need for, if you're going to make these films about transgender people or that have transgender characters, to have
Include them.
transgender people sitting in on those, being part of that production, that meeting, that whatever it is. I really don't know how Hollywood works, but that makes me think within the medical community. And that's why I'm so glad there are more and more people trying to work within that realm to bring attention, but that first and foremost, there need to be more trans voices in those spaces. Because
Right.
even when I try to, and I, like Amber, when I try to educate, I always have to remind myself, I'm speaking from this perspective that is still so limited because I'm not a trans person. And having more trans voices in those spaces, how do we make sure there are more opportunities for trans folks to, make it all the way up, become part of those bigger conversations and those important roles, and to become those doctors, to become those healthcare providers? How do we create those opportunities, make sure that they continue to exist? Because until then, I think it still kind of becomes, it still remains those people over their situation.
Right. Yeah, that brings to mind, and this would have probably been about 10 years ago also. I reached out to an endocrinology department for one of my patients, trying to get them started on HRT. And it was, one of the best endocrinology practices in the area where I was at the time. And I contacted them, so excited. I'd worked with them before on different things. And I said, hey, I've got this client needing to start on HRT, and gave them some background information. And the response I got from a very well-respected endocrinologist was, we don't work with those kinds of people. Now, I saw Amber's look, and that's exactly probably the look that came across my face as well. A couple of years later, I learned from that same provider that he did not feel comfortable providing care because he didn't feel he had any knowledge whatsoever to provide, quality care.
Right.
I was able to get him connected with other providers in the field where he was able to, work with them and find the information. But even in a situation where someone was responding in such a way from a good place, I don't know what I'm doing, so I don't want to cause any problems.
Right.
Just the way it was communicated created a brand new barrier in and of itself with the words that were chosen.
Right.
So I think, there's the education, but there's also just that basic human quality. Expanding upon that, we need to make sure that we have all the voices at the table. I'm continuously surprised as I'm speaking with providers in other countries, different regions of the world, the misinformation I have about what's going on the ground there. When I'm able to talk to a colleague in Turkey or India or Spain, Norway, and I'm like, oh,
right.
I thought I knew how things were there, but I am clearly wrong. Or indigenous populations, First Nations, First Peoples,
Yep.
having their knowledge at the table. I think when we talk about education, that's where we get it. We all have to sit at the same table together and be exposed to the same things at the same time, so we can work through it as a community.
Right. And I mean, honestly, every community is going to have different perspectives. We all have different perspectives. We're not all going to have the same, but I don't think you can say that this represents everyone if we don't have representation from everyone
Right.
sitting down to speak. And at the same time, like Jenni and I are talking about, and we talk about often, like we both would prefer, well, not prefer, but if our children choose that they don't want to be that like out front advocate, they don't have to be. If they want to just live their lives, it's okay. But we choose not only because of our kids, but because we know there are other kids out there who don't have support. We choose to be out there and to speak out about it and to educate because we want everyone to be included. We want everyone to be supported. We know when kids are supported at home, they become much more, I don't know how to put this, not happier adults, but they're not traumatized adults.
Yeah.
They're less
They're
traumatized
resilient.
adults. Yes, they're much more resilient. If you come from a supportive environment than someone who doesn't. And we see the numbers. We see the numbers within the trans community and how that impacts the youth if they aren't supported. And that's staggering. Those numbers are staggering compared to the normal youth populations and what their numbers are in those same categories for mental health disorders and substance abuse and homelessness and suicidal ideation. The numbers, it goes on and on. And I just feel like if we educated more, we wouldn't have the misinformation echo chamber that we currently do. And it's even fed and fueled sometimes by people who are within the healthcare industry. And I kind of have to like, we went to school together. You sat in class beside me. I don't understand how you got to that point.
Literal nurses not getting vaccines. I mean, you know what I mean? That's just gonna happen. It's just gonna happen. I was absolutely utterly shocked because my sister works in a hospital that she was telling me that was going on during COVID, that there were nurses who refused to get vaccinated. There were overheard talks from nurses telling patients, don't take that vaccine. I mean, goofy stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I had nursing friends that I disconnected with because they were proudly posting about how they were quitting their positions during the height of the pandemic in the first year before we had vaccines because the vaccines were about to come out and their hospitals were going to require them to have them to work, and that they were refusing because that was in violation of their freedom. And I just thought, patient first. This is the first thing we're taught. Like, this is patient first. Like, I just felt smacked in the head. Like, how did you go through 4 years with me? How did you arrive at this? Because that was not patient care to me. Patient care was whatever the patient needs, they get. They come first. Whatever my crap is, whatever my thoughts are about the vaccine or the virus or religion or their identity, any of that is all left at the door. And I'm going to treat that person the best way I can because that's patient care to me. And it soon dawned on me that everybody has also a different perspective of what patient care is to themselves, even within the profession. So, yeah, not the best way to learn that, but I have seen that. And I have had people, like I had a friend of mine who reached out not too long ago. She actually had put a very passionate post on Facebook about, I think, losing, if I'm not badly fooled, one of her friends, a trans friend, and how she kind of was speaking out about the election and so forth. But we kind of spoke afterward in the background, and I was just like, I'm so proud to know that there are still a few of my friends that were in the nursing career that would uphold autonomy. And specifically, the first college I went to was a school, a religious. It was Barton. So it's the first religious Christian school here in North Carolina. And so it it wasn't surprising to hear a lot of the opinions from that particular population because they had gone, and I understood that. But she was one of those. And to hear her come out so hard for the population, I had to go like in the background and thank her for it. Like it really, it was, and we talked about my kid and we just talked about some things that had gone on in the background at Barton that I didn't approve of either, because I had kind of called out some of these things in school and in the education, like, why aren't we being taught this? Like, this is A, that there was a lot of discrimination we we're being taught, but B, that this whole population was left out. Why aren't we talking about this? And every time I just kind of would get like the blank expression on my professor's face and be like, okay, and just walk away. Like, I'm not getting anywhere with this one.
Well, I think, even the conversations and, all risk going into a hot topic here, but, the topics of what is sex, what is gender, those conversations need to happen.
Yep.
And they are quickly shut down as, well, anything that falls outside of a masculine, feminine binary is wrong. It's an exception. It doesn't happen. But by definition, if something is existing, it is natural and it is occurring. So, how do we have those discussions of, whether it's sexual differentiation at, the first 6 weeks in utero, or, hormonal influences? I was involved in a conversation recently about whether or not it's justified to really look into the biological underpinnings of gender, because that's, there's points of view on
Right.
both sides. So,
Right.
we don't present even those basic topics of, it's all biology. We all say that. But when we say that, we're overly minimizing what biology is.
Right. Right.
And I don't think most of us don't even have those conversations. I know in medical schools where I've presented and taught, there might be a mention of sexual differentiation or a mention of intersex or sexual development disorders.
Right.
And
But
that's
that's
it.
it. Mm-hmm.
And, we add up the percentage of the the estimated percentage of the population who's intersex combined with the percentage of the population who is identifying as trans, and we're getting up to large numbers of people.
Right.
But it's just like, oh, we're going to mention this offhandedly. People don't know what they don't know.
Right. Right. And they yeah, no, there's so much to that one. I think one of the biggest disconnects I had was realizing just how little when I went to Barton, here, the Christian college. So I'm at the Christian college, and this is the only time that I ever heard about gender identity. We had a class that I took as an elective that was called Human Sexuality,
Right.
and it discussed sexuality. It broke down gender identities, lots of the whole spectrum of at that point in time what they were. It didn't include everything that we include now, but it did include quite more than I had ever seen before. It broke down pronouns. It broke down, honestly, bodily autonomy. It broke down different questions of, say, for instance, like when we look at evidence-based practice and when we're looking at, okay, so hormone replacement, and what does it look like in this patient? Well, that's based on trials that were typically done with cisgender, typically males. It's not looked at what has actually happened within this population. So how do you really know how their results would be? And so there were even questions within this class of that, of like, we're not talking about this in endocrinology. We're not being taught this within like, what do you do to uphold like maternity? Like, or if a child comes in and looking at their puberty, like, okay, if they plan to have children later, are you having those discussions? And all of that was in an elective. That wasn't an elective I had to have. I just took it.
Mm-hmm.
So within this class one night, we're talking about gender identity. My kid has not come out to me at all yet. But he had been looking up for years different types of top surgeries for gender neutral chests. And I knew this. And so after class, I go up and we'd specifically been talking about gender identity that night. And so I go up after class and I say something to her. And I mentioned about, my child and the research. And I think my kid might have been 14, 15. And the teacher looks at me and goes, good luck with that.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, oh, okay. So we can teach it, but we can't talk about it. Got it. And walked off. And so, yeah, and that was one of my professors who also was head of like maternal health at the local hospital and worked at the outreach clinic. So it was kind of like, wonder how you're upholding that autonomy outside of the classroom. So, I mean, even there, you're again talking about here's a healthcare professional on the floor who has 25 plus years of experience, who's also teaching. And you're teaching within your class how to uphold autonomy, but afterwards, when I actually ask you about my own child's, you pass it off like, good luck with that. Like we have to have the conversation.
Yeah, it's basically, I've given you all the information I have. I can't give you anything more.
Right? Right? And I don't want to discuss anymore. That was more my interpretation.
I'm wondering, Amber and Jenny, if you're able to hop on here in a second, what do you all see as the biggest need outside of education for professionals, especially mental health professionals? I would love to know what your thoughts are of what needs to be done better or more than. I believe all of us we can all do better, try harder, and be more motivated for change. What do you all see?
I would go back to what I had said before. I think that there need to be more transgender voices and places at the tables. That's bringing in folks who, don't have anything to do. I just think that there needs to be more of that. I don't know what else to call it except exposure. And I think that needs to be a regular thing. I don't think it should be a one-time class they take. That's some kind of elective, like a continuing. I don't know what y'all call it.
Continuing ed.
Yeah. So, in law, it's CLE is continuing legal ed. So, yeah, whatever. Just having it as some kind of elective. Oh, yeah, I'll pick this as my continuing ed, because somebody who doesn't care or who isn't interested in that isn't going to pick that anyway.
Right.
I just think that it needs to be more continuous.
Well, I mean, I think I look at it, and this isn't even psychologically speaking, what you were asking, as far as in the mental health realm, but just looking at this week, looking at the Supreme Court case and
Hmm.
seeing some of the reactions and some of the commentaries back and forth between questions of what, like Barrett even asking, give me some proof of discrimination. How many anti-trans legislation laws across the country do you need to say that we don't see discrimination against this
Right.
population and their health care access? Like just that one alone. And it's like, how can you, we made history. We had the first transgender lawmaker or lawyer up there in front of the court for the ACLU representing, and they're still questioning. And I don't know how, like it doesn't affect other people,
Hmm.
how they choose to live their lives. And so the pushback, I want to duck my head. I want to put my head in the sand and not say that these people exist. I'm really hoping we don't push that at the Supreme Court level, because then when we talk about mental health care, then I start worrying about how does that filter down with healthcare access, because there is healthcare access for this entire population. And does
Hmm.
that even include their mental health care access? Because if they're not getting their health care access, they're definitely going to need mental health care and access to that. And if they're not going to be able to get that, I'm not going to say I feel like that's what their agenda is. I don't like to put that presumption out there. But I know it's definitely going to cause more harm within this population. And that I'm very concerned about. I feel like, and you, as within the psychology program, you're already trying to make sure that they are keeping their anxiety in check, their
Right.
depression in check, right? Because that is through the roof right now
Right.
across the country. I'd argue across many countries at the moment, depending
Mhm.
on how their elections just went. Um, so I think making sure that we're helping the people who are in fear the most is probably one of the highest priorities at the moment. And really, because I know this entire population is exhausted.
Right.
And so I don't know how we provide a way to release some of this, to relieve some of that exhaustion, to build
Hmm.
them back up. I mean, we can talk about it, we can support them, but that doesn't refuel them, especially in this limbo period between now and January. And honestly, the next few years, I'm just watching my population and what they're choosing, whether they're leaving the state that they've always lived in, whether they're choosing to leave the country, or to leave their place of employment currently because it doesn't offer certain things for another company that does, to uphold their space, and whether or not they get to exist as themselves. Yeah, I think it's really hard. I don't even know what you would call that. I just think it's more support. And again, having that access is really one of the keys to it right now. And I think that is probably one of their highest, what I'm hearing from my crowd is their highest concerns is, are we even going to be able to access that anymore?
Right. Right. And I can say, with the people I work with, whether my own clients or patients or community members, that's the largest concern I'm having is what does the future hold? And no one knows. There are,
Nope.
I can assure people there are, people on the professional level that are having these conversations about how to go about ensuring people continue to access medically necessary care. But it's almost like we're throwing darts while blindfolded. We don't know exactly what where the target is,
Right.
which opens up this whole other area. I agree with everything that's been said. We need more education, we need more representation, we need more voices at the table. We also need more of that support, just that basic support. So in my local community, just actually yesterday, the local LGBTQ Center of the Cape Fear region hosted a document day, which we hosted lawyers from around the state who came in, helped people process legal name changes, gender marker changes, social security paperwork, driver's license forms, birth certificates, everything. And, a lot of us community members and professionals in the area brought snacks and just hung out, and it was a nice relaxed place where people could come and get access to things to help lower some of the anxiety. Maybe that
Right.
is the part that we need to be focusing more on, is building
Right.
that sense of community and showing up for one another. I've had a conversation with many of my clients and patients recently. Historically, I am not very involved in the local community, LGBTQIA community.
Me either.
Intentionally so, because my clients have confidentiality with me, and I don't want them to feel uncomfortable if I were to be in the same space they were, feel like
Hmm.
their therapist is spying on them or something. I try to keep a wide ring around myself. But I've had to have a conversation that, I have to start showing up to these local things and sharing my voice and my privilege to assist. Um, and that's been well received. But I think many of us in the professional world do try to keep that wall up between us and our local communities. So there's no tricky social situations that emerge. But I do
Right.
think we all have to come out and lend our voices and show our faces. I've done
Right.
that, on a larger regional and statewide level, but never locally. I've had to step into that. Now, I'm sure you, Amber and Jenny, you have probably experienced similar things in your local communities.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, Jenny and I, we've had this discussion. I don't do a lot in the local because local is just not very supportive. I have
Hmm.
found one or two people in the last probably 6 months or so that I believe they were going to try and start getting something moving again within this county. But it got so bad here that they kind of just shut the whole thing down.
Oh.
Like you would have like a couple of people who would create their own little like social group so they could
Hmm.
meet up and do things. But for the most part, there wasn't like any widespread across the county because it's just that anti. We've been told that's not the constitution or in our state constitution, so therefore it will not be approved for ordinances, for parades, for acknowledgement, for anything. So waiting for or that to change before you really can initiate anything. I did some stuff at the local level, but where's the local level is pretty. I'm just not real satisfied with the local level. I don't think it would make a lot of headway right now. I think it would
Hmm.
probably cause a lot more backlash than anything. Um, I am looking at, doing more stuff statewide, countrywide, whatever, international, you name it, but not necessarily immediately out my back door until that calms down a little bit.
Hmm.
There's still too many Confederate flags and um, just yeah, it's flaming red in my area at the moment. It's red, really red. So yeah, I'm careful about what's outside my back door.
Hmm.
Mainly because my kid lives with me. If my kid didn't live with me, it might be different. But I don't want to put a target too big on me that gets put on him
Right.
because this community is not pro him whatsoever. Not whatsoever. Even my middle son was talking about some of his friends coming out with remarks that he was like, you, you realize you're talking about my brother, right? And they would be
Hmm.
like, oh, but not him. And they're like, wait, but you can't separate him from everybody else. No. And so that's been my children have been having hard conversations about that really recently with friends about just like how can you you don't know what you're talking about. And again, it goes back to this misinformation. Like one kid was just like, "Would you please get off Twitter? Just get off that crap because you're not you're getting so much misinformation you don't even know
Mhm.
what you're saying. Like, none of that is true. And if you actually knew trans people, you wouldn't say this kind of garbage because you're just promoting more of it for more people to say more garbage. Um, education, 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 support, support, support. Like, advocate, advocate, advocate. Like, however you can. And if it's local, then all for it. And if it's not, do it in another way. For me, like I thought about writing a book and then the project kind of dropped last year. And I was kind of like, what else can I do? So I had started Mama Bear, the audio rooms. And now LinkedIn has shut down audio rooms in a way that I don't believe they're going to provide safety because they're recorded and they're live. And I don't feel like you can have people come in and be vulnerable like they would and had been in Mama Bear. So I'm trying to figure out, do I take that to another space and making sure that that space is safe so that when trans people come in, when parents of children who are questioning and they have questions, whether it be therapists, because I had therapists, I had social workers, I had people in juvenile
Mhm.
services who didn't have experience, who would come to me and go, okay, I don't know how to deal with this population. And they would come in and listen a couple of weeks and that would give them, they would thank you so much for giving me that lens that I didn't have before. So I
Right.
know how to talk and I know how to speak to my patients. So I know more about like what are the parents that are coming to me, what they're questioning, what their needs are. So again, like I want to create that space again, but I guess I'm going to have to create it somewhere else. And I will say I've got two people, a LinkedIn user, hello all, and then another good evening, beautiful souls. And I'll tell you that I had to set up StreamYard differently, the event differently this week. So I think everybody's just going to come in as a LinkedIn user and I can't tell who people are. So don't think I'm ignoring y'all. I just can't tell who that is. But yeah, so I guess if you see that on the state level, what do you see, I guess, going forward as far as with WPATH as being some of the bigger arching movements that need to be supported there, where I guess,
Sure.
where we need more?
Well, I think a big focus is on the theme of the evening, expanding knowledge, whether it's knowledge of the providers who are out in the field. There's a lot of research into the overlap between neurodiversity and gender diversity that's happening right now. Several studies looking into that, but also studies looking into the effects of puberty blockers, long-term effects, and for gender dysphoria, but also whether puberty blockers lead to improved outcomes or not. There was uh, a study leaked about a month ago that said that no, puberty blockers didn't help. However, it looks like the sample was actually people who were already doing pretty okay to begin with.
Right.
So we would, and they had very supportive families, and they were,
Yep.
they were able to access care. So we need to look at those people that aren't showing up, and whether that's through retrospective
Right.
data. We need more of that. So I think that's really the path that WPATH seems to be on right now, is not only being the source of the knowledge that we have, but also being the group to say there are so many more unanswered questions. That
Right.
there are all these new areas. Um, you know, there are also concepts of the differential between gender dysphoria and social dysphoria and biological dysphoria, and where one ends and the other begins. I think that's really interesting to see what we get from that
Right.
aspect as well, and what treatment recommendations are best. um, it years and years ago, it was very much a gatekeeper model where you had to satisfy some quote unquote professional that you were trans enough to transition.
Right. Right.
And that of course was not a good approach, but then just not requiring any assessment or not requiring any evaluation for some folk seeking treatment may not be the best idea either. So how
Right.
do we make those decisions? I think having more of those professionals around the same table and talking. At the most recent WPATH International Conference, I facilitated a panel where we had representatives from all over the world. We had some medical providers, mental health providers, people involved in policy discussions, presenting on what's the state of gender affirming care for youth in your local area. What are the barriers? And then we spent about an hour, a little bit over an hour, in breakout panels with all the participants speaking to the presenters about what have you done in your local area? What's worked for you? What type of assessments do you use? What type of policies do you advocate for? What's working here? So that we could elaborate on that in more places and find
Right.
that feedback. So I think that's a big focus of what I want to do through my role with the DICE committee, the Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Engagement, is bringing all of those people together to be at the same table like we were talking about, so we can say, hey, can we maybe have a exchange program, a knowledge exchange program for what's going on over here versus over here. So I think that's where WPATH is going, is finding more information and being the purveyor of that.
Yeah, because I know a lot of people scratch their heads and they're kind of like, WPATH? And the second somebody tells me they're in like gender affirming, anything within gender affirming care in a healthcare profession, they don't know what WPATH is, I'm just kind of like, we need some work. Let's sit down. Let me send you some information, and just start kind of sending over some. And I'm not by any means an expert, but it opens the door for them to go, oh, because I've had a lot of people who were like, I had no idea this existed, who were therapists, and it was just kind of like, well, here you go. Like, let me pass this on some more. But it goes back to that education piece of, when you're like going through school to even get your degree, if you're not being taught from the very front end, from the very basic level, and building on that, people don't really know how to respond in patient care to their patients and how to support them. And that is really where we've got to get, is that you have more of these conversations so that everybody has it's not necessarily everybody has to agree on the same opinion, but you have different tools in your wheelhouse of what might work for somebody. Okay, well, that didn't work, but maybe this would. And I heard about this modality from this meeting that's going on over here. This might actually would work better. Maybe we should look at this. Maybe we should kind of do a trial and error and see what our response rates are. I think, honestly, that should be the way of healthcare in general globally, is that we should look at how we treat different disorders. And then whoever has better outcomes, maybe look at the ones that have less, the word, not worse, but lesser outcomes, and go, how could we improve these? What are they doing we aren't? So that we all get to a level where we're all kind of more on the same page. And that's where I think probably in the healthcare industry, whether you're talking about mental health or physical health, where I think we're lacking is being on the same level of education about the LGBT community as we are with every other community that we support. So yeah, I think it does. It goes back to education.
Yeah. Well, it's that deficit model, right? If we're starting from a place of zero knowledge and we need to build that up, getting to the conversation of, well, what are the treatment modalities that are most suited? Well, that's miles and miles away if we have to start with someone's mere existence.
Right? Like it's like, you're even like, do you acknowledge that they exist? Can we start there? Like that is, and that honestly, that's what I felt like I got from that professor that night when I went up to them and said something about my child questioning, like looking at these surgeries and how would she handle that situation? That was kind of what her feedback to me was like, no, not interested. I gave you the bare what I needed to tell you, and then I'm not concerned with this, because they just didn't want to deal with it. And again, it's because she's 25 years in. 30 years in, wasn't educated on it, therefore doesn't need to uphold it. Why do I need to know this information?
Right.
And I feel
I've
like
never
that
needed
that
it before.
right, and I feel like that's some of that brunt that we run into. That I know Dr. Diana's talked about that last time she was on our show. She had been picked up by a hospital and was actually going to be working with every single member of the bedside staff to train them in this, which I thought was fantastic because that is part of the issue is that they don't know how to uphold the autonomy. They don't even know how to speak to them. Like
Right.
it's like, oh my gosh, they're this. Like it's like they become alien to them and they're not. They're human beings. And just because you haven't been taught doesn't mean you can't learn.
Right. And it doesn't cancel out someone else's humanity just because you haven't
No.
opened a book that has information about them in it.
That's the big one. That's the big one. The fact that we're questioning whether or not they have humanity, that they can exist, that they have rights, is yeah, I'm scratching my head how we're in 2024 here. But at the same time, it doesn't stop. Like, I mean, that is the reason why we keep having these conversations. So that, like, Jenni and I, when we started the show a little over a year ago, was because we knew we had a year to the election. And there was so much misinformation already out there that we both were kind of like, okay, we don't know where this will go, but we have to at least start having the conversation about our kids are normal and should be able to have the same lives as everybody else. And okay, if you don't understand it, that's your business, but it doesn't prevent my child from living their full lives.
Sure. There are many, many, many things in this world that I do not understand.
Right?
Doesn't change the fact that they are
They exist.
physics. Nope, don't
Right?
understand physics. It still works whether I understand it or not.
Chemistry. Chemistry. Do not understand it. Do not understand it. But I know it exists. We wouldn't be here if it didn't. And in fact, it's the basis. I hated this. It's the basis for every science. No matter what science you take, like there are other sciences that you can take that you don't have to take other sciences to take them. But chemistry, you will always take chemistry in any science that you take. And every science I took, it would be like, chemistry again? Like, come on, how many times do I have to see this? So my chemistry instructor she would laugh at me and be like, it's the basis of every science. And I'm like, just stop. Stop. I was like, I love science until you get to chemistry, and then you mess up. My brain turns into a puddle of mush. I don't I
Mhm.
don't get it. Pathophysiology, same thing. Chemistry of the body tied to disease processes. That was even worse. It was like, oh, I thought chemistry was the death of me, and now I have to take patho. Great. Um, yeah. So I'm glad I didn't go any further up. Like I didn't want to go. Like if it got worse than that, it was kind of like we talking about physics. Nope, nope. I've hit that's my ceiling. We're good. We're good right here. Um, Jenni, is
Well,
there anything else you wanted to add?
I saw a silly saying the other day that was something to the effect of, trans people have always existed just because we haven't always heard of it. It's kind of like Antarctica existed before it was discovered. It was
mhm.
probably always there. Not only probably, it's definitely already there. And that kind of goes along those lines of like they exist, they're there. I long for the day when there's even knowing that things like gender dysphoria are in the DSM-4. Hey, I understand it. It makes sense for it to be there, but it would be so nice if it was like, oh, it's not about that dysphoria being about the incongruence between the physical body and what's going on, internally. But it would be nice if it could just be, no, that it's just a trans person. And that's normal. That's not some kind of pathology for a trans person. That's actually a normal thing.
Mhm.
That's just my soapbox. Still working around that language of why it's some kind of abnormality instead of just the variance that it is.
Sure.
I
And
think in
looking at
neurodiversity,
medical
I think neurodiversity is kind of the same thing. I think it will change. I think, but those are both two areas that we're still compiling knowledge. We're still compiling evidence and research because we've ignored them or just didn't realize that we needed them for so long. And now that they're expanding, it does take anything in healthcare takes a while because you have to have enough knowledge in there for them to disprove what you said before. It stop trans path. Yes, yes,
Yeah. And, I think that when we look at, that pathologizing of an identity, that's because that's what has been done for so long, whether it was criminalized or pathologized, and the
right,
overlap between the two. And I think we have to move beyond that. Now, how we do that, I do not know. Right now, the way our healthcare system is set up is that there must be medical necessity, and medical necessity is proven by having a diagnosis. And without the diagnosis, how do you access care unless you're paying for
right,
it out of pocket if you want to use your health insurance? Or it's such a systemic problem. It's not just one simple solution.
right,
And I do think I would love to see gender dysphoria come out of the DSM.
right.
And then what is the question in my mind is how do we make sure that people can at least advocate for getting care?
Right.
Yeah.
I think you have to have that assuredness that they're going to have care
Yeah.
before you can remove that. For one, like if you don't have that there, and then we don't have the guarantee that they have access of care, we've lost it altogether. At
Right.
least with that diagnosis code, you still can say this particular group can have access through this means. Um, it's a gatekeep.
Yeah.
And it's a gatekeep that honestly we're seeing lots of legislation try and remove that as well. So then what happens? But I try not to think too far in the future of that because until it goes through,
Hmm.
I'm just not. I'm not going to worry on it. Like I'm thinking about it, but I'm not worried about it.
Yeah. And I
Like
must
there's
say,
too much to deal with today.
well, I have to say, the argument I just presented there was actually fairly naive on my point, because I am seeing on a regular basis gender dysphoria being excluded from coverage through insurance, self-funded insurance plans that will explicitly deny coverage for gender dysphoria, personality disorders, and substance use disorders. Those are the three categories I'm seeing being denied
Yep.
several times. And in my network here locally, a couple of other people are also seeing the same thing. Is that, oh, well, you've got the diagnosis, but your insurance excludes coverage for that diagnosis.
I think, and I don't know if that's their way of getting out of hot water because of what potentially could be around the corner coming in. And
Mm-hmm.
so they're by saying we acknowledge that you have the diagnosis, but we didn't give them care. They don't get in trouble. They don't get funding removed from them. Like
Right.
there is a systemic problem that is,
Mm-hmm.
but the problem is like it's a systemic money problem that's not looking at the whole entire purpose of it was to treat people,
Right.
and
It's so
we've
that they can
lost the
profit.
purpose,
Yeah.
right? And we've lost the purpose, which was to help people, and now it's become no. Oh well, we got to profit off of everything, and it's again, it's we should be doing people-centered care, and this particular population right now is the one it's being targeted the most. So it would make sense that they need the greatest amount of care.
Right.
We've seen the numbers. We've seen the data. Your practice, I know the numbers I've seen. I know Trevor Project was talking about they projected, put out the numbers of what happened right after the election results. And
Mm-hmm.
just that was out of concern and anxiety and fear of what could be around the corner. Not even including like my advocates who work in that community and what they're saying because they're speaking from their lived experiences and their work. Like, are they going to be shut down, A, as a human being, B, the work that they do because they're now considered too extreme, the funding pulled from their position that they do, like it's I know why people freaked out. Like I get why people are really, really, really upset. Um, and I have my moments. I try not to be though, because that's not my experience. Like I'm the parent of someone who's going through that, and I kind of feel, well, it's not my place. That's
Hmm.
not my fear. That's his fear. My job is to support him so he doesn't have to live in fear. Period. And anybody else in that community. So as an advocate, like I give myself that time out space to have my moment to freak out, but then it's like, okay, now get it back together so you can go in there and help other people who have it a lot worse.
Sure.
Um, and again, especially the youth. I'm hoping I got to get up with her, but we were talking about bringing on Katie Jennifer, who is with North Carolina Legal Aid, and she was just featured in Newsweek. I shared it last week. She was featured in Newsweek, and she did an article with GLAD and I can't, maybe PFLAG, I'm not sure, but talking about the fact that her child, who's 17, they get they're not going to like have to worry about whatever is on the horizon, right? Because they will age out and be an adult as far as the minors, the gender affirming for minors. But in the article, she was speaking to what would have happened a decade ago when her child came out if this was in place and what those
Hmm.
impacts would have been. So I'm hoping that we actually bring her on in soon, because she was talking about honestly listening. She had listened into the case, the Supreme Court case this week,
Hmm.
and that was very concerning, which I listened to bits and pieces of it. I didn't tune into the whole thing because, again, I don't want to put myself in fear. So I listened
Right.
to the parts that I really wanted to. And then when I kind of felt like, all right, this lawyer is going off on their little bias, then I would kind of zone out for a bit and then come back to it. Like it just, I'm just not, I don't want to hear a lot of propaganda. And the other side had misinformation that they kept presenting um, because they've not been educated. There's just not enough education out there, and that goes back to what we're talking about: is education, education, education.
Right.
Um, so that we don't have to keep educating. It should just be a known fact. Oh, okay,
Hmm.
and roll on
Right.
like we do. I want everybody else to treat the population like we do. Like they're just human beings. Leave them alone.
And there's a lot to be said for just basic human decency.
Right?
If
Kindness.
we could all
Be kind.
practice kindness a little more, we'd probably all get along a lot better.
Right? Right? Just a little bit of empathy. A little bit of empathy. Um, Jenny, you want to jump on and say anything else before I close this out? I know it takes her a minute to get back.
I feel like everything we've said has been absolutely fantastic. Once again, great show. Sorry, it's always a little technical issue on my end, but no, I've absolutely loved having you on here again, Dr. Stinnett, and yeah.
Well, thank you so much for having me back on, and hopefully, the three of us can talk about maybe some ways to expand this conversation out onto a larger scale, whether it be through North Carolina Psychological Association JEDI Committee. I'm collecting data from some of the members, psychology members right now, about what they're wanting to learn for gender affirming care. And there is some conversation of parental points of view. So that would
Right?
be wonderful. But there's also opportunities with WPATH to present. We want to bring more parents to the table as well.
Awesome. Awesome. And I did, when I got in your email, I like hit Jenny up and I was like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. So yeah, I was super stoked about that. Um, yeah. So I think, as I said, I'm not sure who's going to be on next week. I've got to get back with our next guest just so that I know for sure to cement her down. I know we were trying to get her on earlier, but she was sick. And so I'm trying to make sure I'm not imposing even with you, like I'm like, okay, is this date okay before I like announce somebody? So not sure what next week will be, but we will definitely be back at 7 o'clock on Sunday evening Eastern time. So please join us for that conversation. I think in 2 weeks, Jenny and I plan to do an episode that will really kind of talk about navigating company parties, family functions, city events, like whatever you're going to. If you're a parent, how to support your kid, how to watch out for them, how to have those conversations with family members, maybe before you get there, so that people know how to treat your child and if they're going to uphold that. Because if they're not, there are always options. So tune in for those episodes coming up. Dr. Stinnett, thank you so much for being here again. I enjoy every time you come on. We have such great conversations, and I look forward to actually talking with you more. And definitely, if we have people within the North Carolina Psychological Association or WPATH who want to come on as well, like we'd be happy to have those conversations too.
Fabulous. Thank you so much.
Awesome. You're welcome. With that, guys, we're going to close out. Thank y'all. Y'all have a great Sunday. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.